This review copy was provided by Nintendo. Pokémon Sword and Shield marked the first time the mainline Pokémon RPG series has come to a home console. We've had variations of the Pokémon series like Let's Go and Colosseum on consoles before, but Sword and Shield marks the first time for the mainline series. With that said, expectations are set high, and while the gameplay is there, the presentation leaves a lot to be desired. Pokémon Sword and Shield's story has a somewhat familiar setup, though the excitement and motivation behind it has been vastly improved. You and your childhood rival are just about the age of when any other Pokémon trainer goes on their quest to challenge the Pokémon League. The twist here is that your rival's older brother happens to be the current league champion and has yet to be defeated. He's also the very same person that comes home one day to offer you and your rival a Pokémon starter. From there, you go on your adventure to challenge the 8 gym leaders in the Galar region, a new part of the Pokémon world based on Great Britain. While the formula following the Pokémon League isn't anything new, the Pokémon League feels like a bigger deal than it's ever been. I'd compare it to the original Pokémon Red and Blue story. In the Galar region, gym battles are watched as if they were a national sport. The challenges against the Elite Four and the champion are like the Super Bowl. In that sense, it's a grander scale thing to take on the Pokémon League, and that's apparent throughout the presentation of the story elements. The characters here are also filled with personality. Your rival probably could use some work though. Outside of them, I fell in love with the varied cast of gym leaders, each with their own quirks that were fun to challenge. I just wish I could say the same for this region's Team Rocket equivalent. Outside of their main character, the rest of the team sort of falls behind the likes of Team Skull, Magma, and Rocket. Being the first RPG mainline Pokemon game on a home console, so many players expected this game to change up its visual presentation, but most of the major changes came with its gameplay. Most of which I think are for the better. Exploring the Galar region has been a delightful time. Seeing the larger scale sites with a dynamic camera, it truly gives Pokemon that sense of range that I was hoping to see on its console release. It's rare for a Pokemon game to catch my eye with its level design on the same scale as when I first ventured off into the Kanto and Johto regions, but Galar is a worthy contender. Aside from the new region, the formula setup should sound familiar. You just turned old enough to become a Pokemon trainer, and so you pick from 3 starters and set off to collect the 8 gyms and challenge the Pokemon League. That dynamic hasn't changed. What has changed are a bunch of quality of life improvements to the series. Right off the bat, it's apparent how streamlined the adventure has become. Tutorials for the world of Pokemon can be skipped with a prompt that straight up just asks you if you're familiar with Pokemon. You're able to capture your first Pokemon pretty early on, and objectives are now placed on your map so you know where you're always supposed to go next. While yes, some of this stuff can be considered making the game easier, it also lets veterans like myself just continue with a faster flow for traditional Pokemon. Don't fret though, that doesn't cut into the adventure time. This still is an easy 30 to 4 hour game, only now with a lot less drag. For example, you can now travel on your bike, and that auto lets you travel between both land and sea. A taxi that's unlocked after the first gym makes traveling across the map an instant transmission. Sure, it's a bit of a bummer to lose out on rideable Pokemon from previous entries, but there's no doubt that it's a snappier setup. That's the general take with the mechanics here too. Everything feels faster and improved. Pressing the Y button on your Switch lets you instantly connect online to link trade and battle others online. This becomes a greater deal in the wild areas. Wild areas are a new thing for the Pokemon series and probably are the thing that got most people excited for Sword and Shield. They're not exactly open world sections, but more like large scale sandboxes. I would describe it as what I thought the Safari Zone would have looked like when I played Pokemon back on the Game Boy. Adopting the wild encounters from Pokemon Let's Go, Sword and Shield drops the random encounters for Pokemon wandering throughout the wild. I absolutely love this design change. Being able to avoid Pokemon I don't want to battle and then go after those I've yet to see is so relieving. That's not to say that random encounters are completely gone though. Seeing an exclamation or question mark in the grass can still cause a random encounter if I walk into it, but that's still something you can avoid easily. These wild areas almost feel like hub towns in an MMO, but for Pokemon. If you connect online, you can see other trainers wandering throughout, capturing and battling wild Pokemon. Throughout the area are these dens that harbor both Energy and Dynamax Pokemon. Dynamaxing is a new mechanic in Sword and Shield that replaces Z moves and Mega Evolutions. These turn your Pokemon gigantic for 3 turns, giving them these major stat buffs while also changing up their movesets into a grander scale attack. It's a more flexible mechanic too because it's not limited to certain Pokemon, though it is limited to certain situations. It can only be used during gym battles and max raid battles, making it more of a strategic mechanic during the more important battles. Speaking of max raid battles, they're a thing, and they take place in the wild areas inside of these dens. You can challenge these gigantic Pokemon with friends or strangers online, though the game will offer you bots if you can't find anyone. These feel like raid battles from Pokemon Go, and they're a fun challenge. Taking these Pokemon down or capturing them always gets you some sort of great items like TMs or XP increasers that should come in handy. On the topic of XP, that's now forcibly shared across all the Pokemon in your party. While I was worried that'd make the game a bit easier, I actually found it to be really useful. Useful in the sense that my team fell on par with one another. I easily got into the habit of maxing out my favorite Pokemon level-wise and then only using that throughout my campaign in previous games. In Sword and Shield, I instead found myself experimenting more with new Pokemon both because of the Pokedex cuts and because I found it to pretty easily get all my Pokemon on an even playing field. I should also mention that yes, there's a big cut in Pokemon in Sword and Shield, with some fan favorites missing. It's a bummer for anyone that wanted their favorite Pokemon in the game, but personally, I didn't really mind it all that much. It got me to try out new Pokemon, and for the first time in a while, I found myself using more new Pokemon than familiar ones. Pokemon Sword and Shield changed a lot for the series. It's way more approachable, larger in scope, caters to more competitive play, and adds some fun customization options like being able to completely design my character to look like myself. I can't tell you guys enough how much I love shopping for clothes for my character. Those bonuses didn't come without trade-offs though, like cutting the Pokedex in half and some presentation choices, and I'm not convinced they were entirely worth it. When it comes to its presentation, Pokemon Sword and Shield equally impresses as much as it does disappoint. I love the Galar region. Its sense of scope is unrivaled for the Pokemon series outside of maybe the moment you realize that Gold and Silver also contain the Kanto region. With that jump to console, so much has been improved. The range of the region feels bigger, town architecture is grander with some cinematic camera pans and framing. It's certainly an evolution from the more recent 3DS games. Borrowing from Pokemon Let's Go, wild Pokemon now appear in the wild with full 3D models. Furthermore, they'll react to your presence and begin to chase you down. It's as comedic looking as it is scary at times. The wild areas aren't Breath of the Wild environments in Pokemon. Let's just get that out of the way because that's a comparison everyone is making. Even then, for the Pokemon series, this looks good for what we had before. I just wish that this was the more common area, not just the special area for catching Pokemon. Wandering through it, I was captivated by the vistas at least up until I ran closer to them. Upon further inspection, I realized that a lot of the structures here aren't really interactable, but rather just there for looks. That can be said with a lot of the towns too. I saw a lot of copy and paste models of the same record store, houses I couldn't enter, and the design layouts of home interiors repeated constantly. These don't ruin gameplay by any means, but in a console quality Pokemon game, it's something that feels extremely dated. The models of Pokemon share the same wireframes as the previous 3DS games, though look vastly better on the Switch. On top of the resolution, the lighting and shaders for their models have been upgraded and look wonderful. In action, that's another story. You see, as much as I'm not on the side of the whole hate campaign for the Pokedex cuts or the Pokemon Triangle comparisons between 3DS and Switch, saying some of the presentation here is dated is completely valid. It's more apparent in the animation of Pokemon in battles, or rather the lack thereof. Pokemon animations here still look like they did on the 3DS and even Pokemon Gale of Darkness back when it came to battles. I think it's more jarring now with the sense of life walking through the environments that get completely stomped the moment I enter a battle. Add on top of that the low dynamic camera angles that really want me to see the low resolution textures in battle and occasionally in the overworld, well, it's hard not to notice it. For performance, Pokemon runs well for the most part. It runs at a dynamic 1080p that peaks whenever I'm inside of a building and usually hovers around 900p in any other instance. It looks alright, but models can get a bit fuzzy on their corners. In handheld mode, that resolution is dropped down to a dynamic 720p, and like in dock mode, that usually peaks around inside of buildings. As for the frame rate, it's targeting 30 frames per second, and it does hit it for the most part. The exception seems to be anytime there's an abundance of online players in the wild area, or when Pokemon battles do a split screen of all the Pokemon in the battle. It seems the Switch has trouble rendering that many models at once. Pokemon Sword and Shield introduced some fantastic looking visuals in its overworld. Sure, there are some low quality textures here and there, and the popping of Pokemon NPCs look comical. I think fading them in instead of enlarging them would have been much better, but overall I think the region is beautiful. With that said, that's not ignoring the jarring juxtaposition against the presentation of Pokemon battles. Pokemon Sword and Shield have a great selection of songs for its soundtrack. You'll hear variations of older songs like the Wild Pokemon battle theme, but what stood out to me were the songs for specific battles like individual gym leaders, trainer battle themes, and the title theme. I will say some of these songs to me sound like songs I really wouldn't expect out of a Pokemon game, where previous games featured mainly the piano, the trumpet, and an orchestra. Sword and Shield are heavy on the techno genre. It's not necessarily what I'd expect for the whole British themed region, but it's not terrible. What did disappoint me was the lack of voice acting throughout Sword and Shield. Even just occasional voice acting would have been nice. I mean, I know the Pokemon series has never really featured it, or used it, but with some of the updated looks of these more energetic cutscenes, these personalities feel like they really lack a voice, or rather need one. That's the same juxtaposition I felt when comparing the overworld visuals to the Pokemon battles. Pokemon Sword and Shield arguably feature the largest scope when it comes to the mainline Pokemon RPG series. That's not to say it's perfect, nor is it the best Pokemon game to date in my opinion. I think it does a lot right, but it also leaves a lot of room for improvement, and in that regard, it's a step in the right direction toward what I think everyone imagined what Pokemon would be like on a home console. The changes to gameplay here feel like quality of life improvements that not only make the series more approachable in some aspects, but also keep competitive play in mind for those that continue to play Pokemon past the main campaign. For its entry as a home console series, Pokemon Sword and Shield step out of the gate running, but stumble along the way.